Shamwoo, Google's internal code name for the Nexus 6, is almost a 2-year-old phone. It was one of the first generation smartphones to come with a Quad HD display and the first to have Android 5.0 Lollipop right out of the box, and you can still officially update it to Android Nougat without having to install a custom ROM, which means Google still thinks this is a usable device as of 2016. Since the Google Pixels are almost among us, I thought it would be a good idea to look back at the Nexus 6 and see if it still holds up under today's standards. Now, this device was first unveiled on October 15, 2014. It was one of the first smartphones to come with Android Lollipop, as well as one of the biggest smartphones we had ever seen. At the time, this device would have cost you a whopping $650 just for the 32GB model. Now you can snap it for under $350. The reason I point this out is because it's still a decently spec smartphone that holds up well. Now, it's not going to outshine other flagships released this year, but compared to more expensive mid-range smartphones such as the Nexus 6 or OnePlus 3, there's not a huge difference, especially in real-world use. These devices may have slightly better specs on paper, but overall I've had similar experiences. When Shamwoo was first announced, everyone was complaining about the size, saying a 5.96-inch display was way too big, and I still tend to agree with that notion, but not to the point where everyone thought it would be unusable. Sure, it's a bit wide and uncomfortable with one-handed use, but in the end I got used to it and saw it as a regular sized smartphone. The way I see it is Google was trying to experiment with the display size, trying to find the perfect screen size smartphone, and in result we got the Nexus 6P the following year. Plus, that metal band that wraps around the edges and rounded back with the dimple in the center still gives it a premium feel in the hand when compared to more recent devices. In order to give it more grip and make it easier to hold, I decided to slap a dbrand skin on the back. The one I got has a white marble finish, making the device look extravagant. I'll leave a link down below if you want to check one out for yourself. Anyways, with a Quad HD AMOLED display, this screen just shows that there hasn't been a huge impact, emphasis on the huge, on smartphone panels for the last 2 years. I'm not saying screens haven't improved since 2014 or there haven't been any higher pixelated smartphones. I'm just saying in general the display is still acceptable in today's standards, and it won't seem like it's a 2-year-old smartphone just by looking at the pixels. Still, it was one of the first Quad HD displays on a smartphone, so the whites are a little yellowish and washed out when compared to the newer generation AMOLED panels, and in bright situations this display suffers as it gets ridiculously dim. But when you're indoors, it's still super sharp, has great saturation and contrast ratios, and viewing angles are okay. Not to mention that it's also the first Nexus to feature dual front-facing speakers. They do protrude a little, but in the end, you're getting that loud, clear directional sound from all your media, as well as a 3.5mm headphone jack, which seems to be a missing feature on some phones released this year. It's kind of funny. What still nails it for me is what this phone packs, and that's stock Android. Originally, it came with Lollipop, and since then, you will still be able to update it to the newest version of Android Nougat when it officially gets released. That's essentially what I admire about phones made by Google, is you're always going to get the latest and greatest, and the Nexus 6 is no exception. Of course, Google could eventually stop updating this phone with new OS updates since they already did this with the Nexus 5. And even though the Nexus 6 is rocking a Snapdragon 805 chip with 3GB of RAM, it still handled Android Nougat pretty well. The overall UI is still snappy, animations are smooth, and application reload time was not that bad. I did notice a few stutters, and it does seem half a step slower when compared to the Galaxy S7 or Nexus 6, but that's only because at the time Quad HD displays weren't a common thing. Device manufacturers were still working on getting the performance up to par with all the pixels a Quad HD display pushes out. Again, it's still pretty smooth on stock Android, but as you'd expect, it's not going to impress you. And that also goes with the battery as well. At 3220 mAh, this device has decent battery life, but it's not going to impress. Obviously, the newly updated dose feature and battery saver from Android Nougat help to squeeze a little more juice into your daily usage, but 4 hours of screen on time is what I usually experienced. I will say that the battery has definitely improved since it first got released. A lot of people have been complaining about the battery only lasting 3 hours, and since then, those software updates have given this device great efficiency. It also comes with Motorola's turbocharger, allowing you to fully charge the device in just over an hour, and you'll still be using a micro USB cable. Moving on to the camera, this is another thing Nexus devices suffered with until the Nexus 6 came along. The rear camera has 13 megapixels, an f2.0 aperture lens, optical image stabilization, dual LED flash, and up to 4K video recording. Pictures taken usually come out looking solid in both bright and low situations. I do have a few gripes, such as the camera not wanting to focus on a specific subject at times, and when you tap to focus on a specific area, it's going to blow out your highlights with tons of exposure, so you gotta be careful when you tap to expose. Plus, there's no competition when you put it up against one of the best smartphone cameras of this year, such as the Galaxy S7 or iPhone 7. But it's still a camera that takes decent shots and it's not going to disappoint. A few minor mentions that I didn't want to leave out is that the Nexus 6 doesn't have a fingerprint sensor or an SD card slot, but it does support all major US carriers. It comes with 32 or 64 gigabytes of internal storage and supports NFC and wireless charging. With that being said, I still think this is a relevant device, especially with that attractive price tag. You're getting a huge display with plenty of pixels, decent battery life, front-facing speakers, an okay camera, and the latest version of stock Android. If you're a smartphone enthusiast, you're obviously not going to be rocking this 2-year-old device, especially with the Pixel devices coming out real soon. Instead, the Nexus 6 is a great handheld for someone who is looking for a cheap device with decent specs that will get them through the day without a problem. It's also nice to look back on how Android devices have evolved in the last 2 years, and in the end, the only great additions in my opinion that most smartphones have stuck with is the implementation of a fingerprint sensor and the switch to USB Type-C. Oh, and the removal of the headphone jack, except I don't know if that's a good thing. Anyways, that's it for this video. Thank you for watching. Make sure to drop a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Also, check out AndroidPolice.com for your latest and greatest news on Android, and I will see you guys in the next one.